Right, back live with you tonight. Let's get a response then to that conversation just had with the Democratic Alliance, but also speak to other developments that have happened within the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. And I'm joined in studio by the spokesperson for the Minister of DIRCO, that's Chrispin Phiri. Chrispin, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. You would have, of course, had a very busy morning. The Minister engaging with his counterpart from the Ukraine, which would have culminated in what we are hearing was announced by the presidency, the signing of this visa waiver agreement. Just first and foremost, it seems to me, and I'm a layperson, I don't know how government works, this would have been a process that would have been layered. One, yourselves as the Department of International Relations would have needed to sign on this agreement. Yes, the Department of Home Affairs as the implementing department, I suppose, would have needed to sign, and the President, being an international agreement, would have needed to put a signature on this. What really would have transpired here that would have led to, I suppose, one party going ahead before the others?
Yeah, I think we are dealing with a bit of breakdown in a bit of protocol, because ordinarily an agreement gets announced once the President has signed a presidential minute, then it's official that we now have an agreement. But in the background, you can imagine building up to you getting that presidential minute, there will be a lot of going to and fro between the specialist department, DIRCO, and the counterparts in another country to ensure that we agree on the text, everything is ordered. And once all of those boxes are ticked, and they're very important boxes, then everything is presented to the President for approval and his signature. Then we can then officially say South Africa has entered into an agreement with country X on a particular issue. In this case, it's the diplomatic visa waiver agreement. And normally what happens is we would announce it as South Africa has. It would not be an individual minister taking credit for a particular development of a government process. And I think that's within the context that also Mr. Magwenya, and I'm not his spokesperson, but that's also within the context that Mr. Magwenya took concern. And I think rightly so. Normally such things would then be done where the ministers would be present as at an official ceremony, where you then see, okay, so this minister was involved in the technical process and that minister, and then you have an agreement in place officially, and that's how it's announced. So in this instance, we are seeing something concerning in government communications. Some of us were always told that never conflate the party and the state, but I could say with some concern that we are starting to see a bit of a confluence there, and we hope that our colleagues in government communication and information systems will put in strong protocols in place so that when we communicate as government communicators, we are able to say this is what the South African government has done, because we're serving South Africans with no regard to what your political affiliation is. And there will be a time where you'll be able to explain how your policy position has influenced the direction that government has taken. But in the course of the work, what's most important is to ensure that the work gets done without any due interference politically. And that's
the view that, from Muletsimbek earlier on, there's been some complacency at GCIS really to bring ministers in line in terms of how they communicate. So they should have played a little bit of their role there. But also, too, what Ryan is raising, that there's complacency within, we'll say, ANC communicators in government. So they've been slacking, and the DA is seemingly ahead of the curve.
No, I don't think they would say it's correct to say that there's been slacking. There's a process of how government communicates. Like I say, a matter like this is not for one minister to say, I have decided. As you correctly pointed out now, this is a process that starts in 2022 or even further back than that, and then someone else says, no, I woke up and I decided to do this. That's how it now appears. And one then gets political mileage because it appears as if you have now miraculously solved a particular problem. Meanwhile, there's a whole process around it. And then it turns out that actually you've announced at a point where the technical process and the formal processes were not complete. That's why there's a particular government protocol in communicating. And until now, we always thought that it's well understood. Yes, at times it's a bit slow. It can be, but one has to follow that process because you then avoid a situation where you're announcing something that is not yet complete properly, and you avoid that. To say that there's been a lack of communication from other parties in the past, I think that's a political statement that I will veer away from. But safe to say that we've been always told, don't conflate the party and the state. And if you want parties to now claim that every government initiative is theirs, then we won't communicate as one government. You could imagine the Minister of Sports will communicate as though the Springboks possibly are his personal project. And these are national symbols. Everything that we do is for the sake of the country, for the people. So we need to communicate in that way, that we're one government and we are on the same page about what is being done and its importance. It's not a personal victory that we are communicating.
Let's talk about the signing itself and its significance and the view now from a government point of view that says, well, it's about time. It's taken far too long to get to this point, and Ukraine has been made to feel like it's being left out as far as the bilaterals with South Africa.
Our bilateral relations with all countries go through various stages. You will recall that actually Ukraine became a state in 1991. And so, yes, when people were there during the liberation struggle, it was under the United Soviet, so this the USSR, actually, as it was then. So it was still, as you like, Russia, if you like. So these relations now that the Soviet Union has broken up, we're now engaging in bilateral relations with many other new countries that have come out of the Soviet Union. So these relations are growing. And this is part of that. This is not something that happens at linear speed. We engage on issues of mutual concern. It can happen sometimes that there are no major issues of mutual concern that arise over a long period of time. But we are seeing now with the war in the Ukraine and Russia that even Africa is affected by this war because we are not able to get our fertilizer products and so on. And so the supply chain in that era, in that space of the economy has been severely affected. So now it warrants us to say to our Ukrainian counterparts, let's stop this war, let's find a way of finding a solution around this. As like saying to our Russian counterparts as well, that this war is not in anybody's favor. At the end of the day, there are certain principles that have been violated that we need to show get addressed. We've said so. We've said our position also is a non-aligned position, which is not neutral, non-aligned, and it's maybe something I can explain to viewers on another day because it requires a substantive...
Active non-alignment, what does it mean? As you're answering the active non-alignment question, there's also MK Party who have issued a statement saying this active non-alignment, if you want, is creating confusion in foreign policy, one, but two, they would rather have you not have an agreement in place with the Ukraine, who they view, it's a political statement now, to be fighting a proxy war of the West.
No, so non-alignment, let me explain this, is a set of principles actually that we believe we should view any conflict through or any bilateral relation through. It reinforces multilateralism. It believes in the sovereign territory of states, so everyone has the right to their sovereign state in the current form that it is in, and the right to self-determination, amongst others. So there are about 7 principles that determine what non-alignment is, whereas neutrality is literally sitting on the fence and looking the other way. That is neutrality in foreign relations. So people often conflate this to say, no, non-alignment is akin to being neutral. It is not. It's completely different. It means we'll engage both sides. And it comes from the era, actually, of the Cold War, where you had 2 superpowers, of course, the Soviet Union and the West, traditionally, as we call it, which would include Western Europe and the USA and that like. And most of the countries that were colonized took a position to say, we're not going to stretch us, we're not going to be pandering to the interests of one colonizer or pandering to the interests of the other people. We're going to look at what's best for our own country and what we require to stand up and be self-determined. So a number of former colonial states, none less than Ghana President Kwame Nkrumah, founded this non-alignment foreign policy initiative in Bandung in 1955. And that's where now it's actually called the Bandung Principles. And that's how we apply non-alignment to this day. So what the MK Party say, clearly they must go and revisit history. At its core, non-alignment actually is underpinned even by Pan-Africanism itself, to say, as African countries, we must be able to assert ourselves in the world without being concerned about whose interests we are serving. We must be serving our people's interests. So we are saying we're not going to be pandering to the West or the East. We're going to look at what's in the best interest of Africa, what's in the best interest of South Africa. And in this instance, the war in Ukraine and Russia doesn't serve us. In fact, it harms our economy. And that's why it's very important for us to be able to engage our Russian counterparts and our Ukrainian counterparts. So how do we ensure that we stop this war so that our economic interest as a country can also flourish?
Yeah.
Quite frankly, that's really what it is.
Right, we'll take a break, and when we come back, I want us to talk about, of course, South Africa returning now to the ICJ against Israel. And once again, Democratic Alliance saying to my colleagues earlier on that this case has highlighted the limitations of the court as an institution to ensure adherence to international law. I'd like to get your views on that. We'll continue with Chrispin Phiri after the break. Do stay with us. Back with you tonight here in Focus. Well, South Africa has returned to the International Court of Justice, situated in The Hague, submitting their comprehensive dossier to really substantiate its claims of alleged genocide by Israel in Gaza. Following this submission, Israel will have until July 28th next year to file a counter a memorial. Now, in a show of solidarity, a group of people gathered outside the Western Cape High Court this morning to support South Africa's submission. And our reporter, Latasha Naidu, was there and filed this report.
Palestine will be free!
Palestine will be free!
From the river to the sea!
From the river to the sea!
United under the banner of Free Palestine, dozens of people braced the rainy Cape Town weather on Monday to show support for South Africa's latest memorial submissions to the International Court of Justice, the ICJ. The gathering, organized by humanitarian organization Gift of the Givers and pro-Palestine groups, saw politicians, activists, lawyers and ordinary South Africans coming together for a common cause.
The fact that people could come out on a Monday morning braving the cold in Cape Town is again indicative that the people of Cape Town are justice-loving people, that the people of Cape Town in their diversity are standing together in support of the Palestinian people, but more importantly that they are in support of the South African government's latest action to ensure that Israeli genocide is exposed.
On December 29, 2023, the South African government brought the case against Israel before the ICJ, accusing it of genocidal acts in its military campaign in Gaza. South Africa's memorial to the ICJ follows that of interim measures being issued by the court in January, March and May, ordering Israel to lessen its aggression on Gaza and to allow for more humanitarian aid to flow. The new submissions to the ICJ today aims to substantiate claims that Israel is committing genocide in Palestine.
The unfortunate thing about the ICJ case is that it has not resulted in a cessation of the killings, of the wanton killings of Palestinians. That continues to this day, and we're hoping that this submission today will turn things around.
Meanwhile, Gift of the Givers founder, Dr. Imtiaz Suleiman, who has been leading humanitarian relief efforts in Gaza, rubbish claims that his organization is funding terrorist groups blacklisted by the US government.
Well, firstly, I'd like to question his credentials. Is he a lawyer, really? Did he work in the High Court? Which university did he study in? Because in terms of law, the first thing you got to do is have irrefutable proof. So please bring that proof. I want to see it. Bring that proof. And please charge me. Forget Gift of the Givers, charge me personally. At the SAPS, at the SIU, at the Hawks, at the NPA, with DERCO, with State Security, the Reserve Bank, Standard Bank, who are bankers, and Standard Chartered Bank, and even the banks of Israel.
For Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405, I'm Latasha Naidu, reporting from Cape Town.
Still with us, speaking for the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, is Chrispin Phiri. Now, Chrispin, you have submitted, if you like, or filed what is called a memorial. Now, according to the laws of ICJ, you're not supposed to make the memorial public. But firstly, tell us, what is a memorial? What does it contain?
Yes, so a memorial is essentially our application, which then details all of the evidence that we have of the genocide that is taking place in Israel. And that is what we have filed before the court today. It's quite extensive, I think 750 pages and an annex of at least 4,000 pages, which documents all of the evidence quite extensively and comprehensively. And we do want to commend our legal team for the tremendous work that they've done, our researchers as well for this really mammoth task that they've put together. Accusing another country of genocide is no small thing, and we don't do it lightly. It's quite evident that if you're not blinded by prejudice, you could see that there's a genocide taking place in Gaza.
How different is this process from the one that you would have taken when you were still on the other department with the minister? Now you're on the other side of international relations. But how different is this process? Because as you hear there, the first submissions would have not necessarily ended us up at a point where there's a ceasefire. In fact, the fighting has been going on. In your own assessment, the genocide has been continuing. So others are saying, well, this purely highlights the limitations of the court in this particular institution.
I would say that it highlights the limitations of the United Nations Security Council, because this is a court of the United Nations. This is a court of the world, and ultimately the people that are responsible for implementing its provisional measures, which is what we got when we went to the court in January, provisional measures. I think we went 3 times subsequently, which were very clear in what it expected member states to do in line with the Genocide Convention. And I'm saying member states deliberately because there are a number of member states that have signed up to the Genocide Convention. I think it's over 193 countries, to act in a way that stops the conflict in Israel, but also to encourage Israel to have a ceasefire and to adopt measures that allow access for humanitarian aid on a grand scale to prevent what is happening now. Because what we see is that Israel has used starvation as a weapon of war. The people of Gaza have been denied humanitarian aid. We've seen hospitals being bombed. We've seen journalists being killed. And the United Nations Security Council has been nowhere to be found in this conflict. Quite frankly, they have been an obstacle. Only recently we've seen them moving towards pronouncements towards a ceasefire and so on. But still, in that instance, we don't see anything tangible. So it highlights the flaws of the United Nations Security Council. And it's for this reason as well that South Africa has vociferously said that we need to see reform in the United Nations Security Council. The majority of wars that are taking place in the world are also happening on the African continent. Actually, it's 60% of the wars that take place in the world happen on the African continent. Yeah. Yet you don't have African representation on the United Nations Security Council.
What have you relied on in this memorial? Remember your submissions the last time Israel would have come and said, no, these people are relying on social media posts and some doctored videos here and figures that are coming from Hamas itself and so on and so forth. So what are you relying on at this time around in terms of what you're presenting?
Look, this is one of the few genocides in the world that has been taking place and been documented by the people themselves who are being killed. The evidence is awash, it's everywhere. There's overwhelming evidence of this genocide being documented by media, it's been documented by civil society organizations, it's been documented by UN rapporteurs. So there's an overwhelming reams and reams and reams of evidence out there that prove that what you are seeing in Gaza is absolutely a genocide. I'm not at liberty to say exactly where and what we have used as evidence, but I can say with so much certainty that the evidence is overwhelming. And I really believe you only have to be blinded by your own prejudice to not see what is happening in Gaza as a genocide.
Yeah. The war, if you like, deepens in the meantime as we wait for a reply that itself could only maybe come back to you next year in July. Others saying also these timelines are problematic because while you wait for these processes, of course, there's this encroachment, there's bombardments that are going on.
Yes, well, we hope that maybe the court would look at things differently given the urgency of the situation. But we have complied with what the court has ordered us to do. We filed our memorial today. And we hope that those who are required to file their memorials as well, Israel, must file it in accordance with what the court's directions are. But in the meantime, we do continue to call for a ceasefire in that region. We do continue to call for diplomacy to be given a chance. And in this instance, we've seen the complete opposite, extrajudicial killings, and now the war has escalated, and which is exactly what we warned about would happen, is now exactly happening. You're seeing the war escalating into Lebanon, possibly it's going to escalate into Iran, and the entire region of the Middle East is just going to be destabilized, and more civilians are going to be harmed. Already in even in the West Bank, we are seeing settler colonial tendencies taking place there as well, which even the ICJ, in its advisory opinion on whether Israel is an apartheid state, has confirmed that what you are seeing in Palestine is a form of settler colonialism, which we thought might have ended with South Africa, but clearly we were wrong. We still see a form of settler colonialism being implemented by Israel. And this is something that we call for an end to. And we're calling for diplomacy to be given a chance, really. And we hope that we will see a ceasefire agreement soon. At least we are encouraged by efforts by the United States to continuously call for a ceasefire and facilitate some of those elements. They are the people who are closest to Israel, it seems, and at least they will be able to somehow facilitate a process that would ultimately lead to the guns being silenced.
The president was talking on the sidelines of the BRICS summit that he would have had bilaterals with some of the other countries in that BRICS bloc, and told them that you will be making these submissions to the ICJ, and that would have received support from those member countries. Any of those member countries would help you lend weight to the cause that you're making?
We've seen a number of countries coming forward and filing interventions. And in that statement of the presidency, there's acknowledgement of that, really thanking them, because we do believe that in this conflict, you can't have people folding their arms. That is how genocides thrive. You would recall the Rwandan genocide, you would recall the Bosnia genocide as well. People sat and did nothing, and our humanity dies when we do nothing. So we've been grateful to a number of states that have come forward from all across the world to file interventions. The BRICS nations themselves have been very commending of our ICJ stance and have said that this, in support of multilateralism and in support of international law and international humanitarian law, they do believe that this is a good step. We do hope for more states to come forward and see how we can ensure that there's proper access to humanitarian aid in Gaza, and how we can assist to stop this process, or stop this genocide that's taking place. And generally, that is how I think a conflict is resolved, if more states are able to put pressure and are able to intervene in a way that lends credibility to the process of peace. Then that's ultimately how we get peace.